This podcast is a Jeff Townsend Media production.
This is Jeff Townsend. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Indiana Stories. Welcome to another episode of Indiana Stories. I hope you've been enjoying the podcast so far. If you have missed a few episodes, you can go to indianastories.com and get caught up. Also have some blogs there and various other things going on. The podcast is available on every podcast listening platform. Give it a follow, review it. That would be cool. Today's episode, by request, we have a lot of listeners that are maybe not as knowledgeable about the Delphi case. So it gained a lot of interest on the two-parter I did on the case. Obviously, when I recorded that, the news hadn't came out of the arrest of Richard Allen. So I was able to actually go back and catch up with my good friends, the Murder Sheet podcast, a few days ago. And we recorded a conversation here where we're giving a rundown of where the case is at right now with the recent arrest. Yeah, I did go out and make this happen because you all were very interested in listening to it. We will get to that here in a minute. It's an informative conversation that'll get you caught up before the court hearing, I believe, which is on Tuesday, the 22nd. We'll get into that. I just have to mention a few supporters of this podcast that are really good to me and all the content I create. Podden.io, the best transcription, best way to transcribe your podcast, hands down. If you're in the need for that, for whatever reason, I would highly suggest it. I really do. Boomcaster.com, that is where I'm recording every conversation that you're listening to me have. So this conversation with the Murder Sheet podcast, that was recorded on Boomcaster. Can't suggest it enough. Then, of course, podcastpage.io. That is what I'm using to put together all my websites now, the Jeff Townsend Media brand and everything. The team there is really good to me, and I highly suggest you go there if you need a website made. I've actually even used it for something that's not even podcasting, but it's so convenient if you are a podcast, though. You can set it up in like 5 minutes, and it's very high quality, so I suggest it. I got all those plugins in. If you'd like to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter at podcast_father. I'm also, email is good, jeff@townsend.media. Any suggestions or anything else you want to hear or learn about Indiana, I'm always open to that. I won't delay it anymore. We'll get into this conversation I had with the Murder Sheet podcast. We're talking about the Delphi, Indiana murders and where it stands now. I'm excited to catch up with the Murder Sheet podcast with Anya and Kevin. We recorded, I don't know, it was probably like a month ago. We kind of gave a quick summary of the Delphi case and where it stood then. Obviously, a lot's happened since then, and a lot of you listeners wanted to hear more about it. And so we're going to take it won't be a super long amount of time here, but we're going to kind of go over what happened. So we left off on the episode I released a couple weeks ago. We're kind of at a holding pattern here, and a lot of it, in my opinion, was Kagan Klein. It was like, where are we going to go? Where's that going to go with him? And then there's rumors that they had made an arrest. Then shortly after, they did. And I'll let you guys pick up from there. You're much better storytellers with this than I am, certainly.
Oh, we wouldn't say that, Jeff, but thank you. Yeah, this has been a really momentous sort of several weeks for the Delphi case. There was an arrest. Someone has been arrested and charged with killing Abby and Libby. It can't be understated how big a development this is. Everybody else who's come up on the radar before has either sort of gone away or has at least never been charged in connection with the Delphi case. And so we finally have the man, Richard M. Allen, who has been arrested. He's facing 2 counts of what is essentially felony murder in the case. And we think we're covering it closely. It's a very big deal. And it really seems like something's coming together at this point. And, we hope that answers are close for the families.
A lot of the things that were brought up by Lieutenant Carter, for example, like this person probably is living in the area amongst you, probably familiar with him. So the gentleman's name is Richard Allen. He's 50 years old, I believe, right? Lives, I don't know if it's in city limits but point being, he lives, a mile and a half from the crime scene, I guess we'll say, the trails. And he worked in Delphi at the local pharmacy, the CVS. He was a part of the community and would go out about, visit the local bar, restaurant. By no means was hiding or unknown. I think, I don't know if he was so well known, but he was not hiding exactly.
No, certainly not. We actually talked to a few people who knew him.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention he did work at the CVS pharmacy in Delphi, and that pharmacy is actually the only pharmacy in the town. So that means basically anyone in town, whenever they needed some sort of any item at all from a pharmacy, they would go to this place. And so it seems likely that most people in the town had some sort of at least nodding acquaintance with him. And we do know, for instance, that the German family had some pictures developed of Libby for the funeral, and those pictures were actually developed by Richard Allen. And we also know, we've seen for a while, the CVS even had one of the sketches up on one of the windows there. So this, anytime he went to work, he went right past this sketch that was, if the allegations are true, was actually of him.
And just to make things a little bit more eerie, like there's a lot of pictures have come out and stuff. One of them, I don't know if it's a pub or what it is there. You can actually see his sketch behind him on the wall where he's eating dinner or drinking, or I'm not sure what exactly he was doing, but I did see that. So yeah, right amongst the community. This individual originally came forward. You guys know a lot more facts, but he did say, hey, I was there that day, right? He reported himself. Like they asked anybody that was there that day, did you see anything? He came forward and said, I didn't see anything.
Yes, Fox 59 had that first. We kind of elaborated upon it about him coming forward. And then Wish TV also has had this fact that he basically placed himself in the vicinity of the crime on the day of, which when you look back at different high profile crimes, that's not necessarily super uncommon of possible perpetrators doing that as for a variety of different reasons. He came forward, he was helpful, didn't raise enough red flags apparently to, make the investigation feel he's the guy we need to be looking at. But seemingly he's come back around recently, essentially, as far as, we need to look at this guy.
And at this point in time, we don't know why, but something had to have happened. They've circled back. They've discovered something. My question is, we put a lot of focus and you guys taking a lot of heat for the Kagan thing.
Yes.
And to my opinion, it needed to be highlighted one way or another because he was involved in such terrible things that for me as a parent, you need to realize that, take that seriously. Because I know I was watching, I think you guys were on a Court TV. Was it a Court TV special?
Yes.
And I don't remember who the gentleman was, but he even said, like, there's a chance that this was all just a really bad coincidence. There's a chance of that. Things happen like that. Maybe he was messaging her under the fake account the day where it happened. Or there's a connection, right? I mean, because we know that they spent a lot of time on him, regardless if it was that or for all the other child abuse crimes he did.
Yeah, I would say what we're most interested in reporting is typically, what direction is the investigation going? So when investigators are looking very carefully at Anthony Schatz, Kagan Klein, what that might have meant to the case, that's what we're following. And some investigators, it kind of depends on who you talk to. Some people say coincidences are a pretty rare thing. Other people say no, coincidences can happen. I would say the fact that an online predator was in close contact with Liberty German around the time of her death, and that she was enthralled by this person and wanted to meet this artificial person who didn't exist, who turned out to be an adult man pretending to be a teenager. I think that should remain probably an area of focus until we can get to the bottom of it. And I think we're just kind of waiting to see how the investigation continues to play out.
I think it's worth noting that even at the press conference where this arrest was announced, Superintendent Doug Carter made a point of not ruling out the possibility that there were more people involved in the crime than just Richard Allen. And in fact, the investigation is continuing, and it is possible that there may be other arrests. The fact that the investigation is continuing is actually one of the reasons why the probable cause affidavit in this arrest was kept secret.
And people ask us all the time, well, he couldn't have done it alone, right? It must have been a bunch of people, it must have been a conspiracy. We just kind of are withholding judgment. We don't know. I mean, it will depend on what detectives sort of are able to suss out of this whole thing. Are we looking at something where this is a lone wolf perpetrator without any connections to anybody? I think some things that police have said so far indicate that they're at the very least considering the involvement and possible culpability of other parties. But whether that means that multiple people participated in the actual homicide, I think that's something we don't know yet. Is this a situation where there were felonies going on that could be linked to the murders? Or is this a situation where you have multiple parties involved in the murders themselves? We don't know yet. We're definitely following it, but we can say the fact that when Superintendent Carter got up, he was stressing the investigation is not over. We continue to need the public's help. We find that highly significant.
Oh, I agree completely. And like I said before, I trust your guys' information that you're sharing more than anybody's, and there's a lot being shared. A lot of people are indicating that there is a connection. From your sources, is there anything, I'm saying between the family, Klein family, and then Richard Allen, is there anything from your sources that indicate this, or is this just random things that are being thrown out, particularly with the father, maybe?
Right. No, it's a great question. I don't think we've found anything that's a concrete link of somebody saying, yes, they knew each other. They hung out. We haven't found that. We found definitely mutual friends. We found definitely some geographical links. You do have Richard Allen, at least for time, seemingly living and possibly briefly working in Peru at the CVS there. We had a number of people come forward and tell us that they saw him there behind the counter sort of working. And so you do have this small town thing. One thing I think it's important for people who are not from this part of Indiana to remember is that Delphi is quite a ways away from Peru and Mexico. So it's about 40 minutes away. And you don't get a lot of crossover necessarily. I mean, there's some crossover, right? People move places, but we talk to a lot of people from Mexico, Indiana, and from Peru, Indiana. Most of them say, yeah, I don't know that many people who moved to Delphi. Whereas Mexico and Peru, for a little geography lesson, are right next to each other. They're 4 minutes away from one another. Mexico's like the little tiny town.
Right outside of, yeah.
Right. Peru's the county seat. So it's a bit bigger and more robust. So you have the Mexico kids hang out with the Peru kids. There's also a Denver nearby. It's a lot of confusing names, but that's more of a social circle. Delphi is a bit more removed. So we do find some of the fact that people are from the same area and have these social links, that they're friends with people who are friends with each other. We find that relevant, but whether or not it'll turn out to be a concrete link or something that's maybe more of coincidental or something that is kind of tangentially linked, I think that's going to be anybody's guess at this point.
It's fair to speculate that they received information that would indicate that they made this arrest. And I think the thing with me is if there is somebody else involved, 5 years is a long time for somebody not to say something or confess that somebody else had done something. What's the old saying? Two can keep a secret if one of them is dead. That's a long time to go without saying anything. For me, it's curious if it's that, or is it a breakthrough with DNA technology? There's so many different things it could be at this point in time. But going back to what I said, when crimes have two people involved with them, it is very hard to go a lifetime without something coming out, because you're not just relying on yourself not saying anything. You're relying on somebody else.
I would say the one wrinkle to that, in my opinion, is the fact that you have the sexual abuse of children possibly being involved here, and successful child predators who are able to go under the radar can blend in for years in whatever church they're in or whatever community they're in or whatever position of power. And I think, they do find each other and they do exchange abuse materials, and some of them can kind of go under the radar for a long time. So I think in like a typical robbery homicide, yes, a group being involved makes it more risky, but you do have these communities where these people are predators and they do look out for one another because society completely reviles them, rightfully so, because they go after kids, but they have each other's backs because they know that if they go down or, their friend goes down, then, the whole hornet's nest kind of gets shaken up. So that's just one little wrinkle with it. But I tend to agree. The more people involved, the harder it becomes to keep a secret.
Yeah, especially when all speculation, or just not even necessarily about this case, when one of them gets arrested and they have something, that is also what you just said would go out the window. Very few people would be willing to die for somebody like that if they had a chance to get out of it. Just a character thing why they're there in the first place. But a solo act, right, like Dennis Rader, then the Golden State Killer, they were able to keep that close to the vest and nobody else knew about it. We don't think, at least. This particular thing, if there are multiple individuals involved, then I guess we'll see. But like you said, Lieutenant Doug Carter was very adamant on let's keep the tips going. Let's keep everything going. So I honestly don't know. But like you said, it's sealed. So what's happening is it the 22nd when it's happening? And what exactly can we expect to come out of that? I know there's a couple of different possibilities.
Yeah, it's this coming Tuesday, November 22nd at 9 a.m. The judge in the case is going to hold a hearing as to whether or not that probable cause affidavit will remain sealed. And what's interesting is that at least at some points, the prosecutor of Carroll County has indicated that he believes it's necessary for it to remain sealed in order to protect the investigation. On the other hand, the public does have a right to know what's going on. And also, it's interesting to note that Doug Carter gave an interview to WIBC Radio the other day in which he seemed to suggest he didn't think it would be that damaging if it did come out. So considering all of that, we think it is likely that at least some information in that probable cause affidavit will be released.
They can do that, Kevin. They can say, hey, we'll give you this, but we can't give you that. Legally, I don't know how that works. You obviously are the expert. So they can do that. They can pick and choose what can be released from it.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. They can go through it with the equivalent of a black magic marker and run it over those lines and words that they feel would be damaging to be released. That might be something as simple as the names of witnesses, or it could be something else that we're not even aware of.
It makes you, then you're curious, why are they holding it? The investigation's clearly not over, so whatever that means. Going back to Richard Allen, what are some other things about this individual? Does he have a criminal record?
Yeah, it's actually pretty fascinating. So Allen, as far as we've been hearing and seeing in terms of possible criminal record, was very clean. Yeah, did not have any sort of really major red flags. I'm not aware. I think maybe some people turned out like a traffic thing once, but I don't think beyond that there was anything. He really had the appearance of a law-abiding person who was friendly. What people have told us again and again about him is that he was quiet, but not in a creepy way. Like, you have a lot of people who kind of give off a bad vibe and they don't talk to anybody. He was just like, he minded his own business, did his job, was friendly, not too overly friendly, but just kind of did not really raise any red flags among law enforcement, seemingly, in the years that he's, in the 5 decades he's been on the planet, but also with people who interacted with him day to day at CVS and in the community.
This case has led to a lot of speculation, a lot of a lot of finger pointing.
Yeah.
And one of the unfortunate things when this happens, Richard Allen's family takes the impact as well, right? There's a lot of people that come out of this just terrible. And I know a lot of videos and stuff are being shared. Assume his family at this point is completely removed themselves from the location, or if not social media or anything like that. Because I've seen a lot of things.
It's really bad. And I think it makes, I think there's a real lack of empathy when people do that. We just don't know the facts yet. If people were covering up for him and his crimes, then obviously they deserve to be blamed. But there's been no indication that that was the case here. And I think when people say, well, how could you not know that your husband did something so awful? One, he's presumed innocent until proven guilty. But let's, just for hypothetical sake, plenty of spouses cheat on one another or do bad things or, spend money that they're not supposed to be spending and lie about it to their spouse, and they don't get caught for a while. So, if spouses can hypothetically lie to each other about that, then possibly lying about a horrible crime. If the person is good at that and good at lying and is able to kind of build that barrier, then I don't think we should be jumping to assumptions. And certainly nobody should be harassing his family. That does not do anything for the case. It doesn't do anything for Libby and Abby. It just adds more negativity and hurt to an already really negative and hurtful situation for everybody. So I can people are angry about this, rightfully so. These two girls did not deserve this. Their families didn't deserve this. Community did not deserve this. But taking it out on the scapegoats of this man's family before we have all the facts and before we really have a sense of what happened, it's appalling.
Yeah, and I just gave 2 examples of individuals, Joseph D'Angelo and then Dennis Schrader, decades. And it kind of also ended the stigma that people that do that just can't stop. Those guys had done a lot they obviously had several murders and they stopped. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I have no doubt their families didn't know. You can live a lifetime, right? You can be considered a great person in the community and all that. But nevertheless, this case is now forming. So let's say that the original trial date is March, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
And I know these things, Kevin, you could probably speak to this on you as well. These things get pushed back all the time anyway, right? So, what's the likelihood that this could go till a year from now? Possibly. even if they have their whole case right now?
I think it's very, very possible it's going to be delayed a year or even longer. This case is extraordinarily complex. Richard Allen only got his 2 attorneys within the last few days. They have to get his story from him. They have to go through 5.5 years of very detailed investigative case files. They have to try to build a case, get witnesses. That's all very, very time consuming, and all of it takes much longer than you would expect. And then also they have to figure out where they want to do the trial at because, frankly, the people who live in Delphi have been deluged with information about this case for the last 5.5 years. I'm not sure you could even find an impartial jury there.
And I will say, he does have the right to a speedy trial, but the defendant in a case like this would also, we imagine, probably want to waive that to a certain extent as they build up their own defense and have their defense attorneys get their own investigators trying to find out, evidence that maybe points away from them. So it's very complicated, but we kind of imagine that it's not going to be in March.
A couple different things that have come out of this or events that have happened. The judge that was involved in the case willingly withdrew from with being in those activities. And then the second part of that, like you said, he chose a public defender, but that was not the original thing, right? He was going to seek that, but couldn't afford it. It's expensive. So what do we know about this judge that exited, the judge that entered, and then do we know anything about the public defenders at all?
Yeah, so the judge who exited, Judge Benjamin Diener, is the circuit court judge in Carroll County. There were some troubling indications that all was not well in that court. He sent emails on which he seemingly accidentally CC'd media talking about how overwhelmed he was and how much he didn't feel Carroll County could handle this. Released a very pointed and, injecting my opinion here, bizarre opinion about that was just a transfer order. It was just all he had to do was say, okay, you can transfer Allen to the Department of Corrections. But he went on this whole rant. He became like a media critic. It was talking about, the bloodlust of the public. And it was just, it was a lot. What we were hearing behind the scenes was sort of indicated that like this might not be the judge for this because I don't know, something so high profile. You want somebody who's going to really be able to handle the pressure.
How did they go about picking the judge in the first place? Just out of curiosity. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. It just fell to him. I mean, it's a very small county. I'm pretty sure that the circuit court would just be the judge that you would go to for a murder like this. And we were very relieved when he stepped aside. We think that was a responsible move if he didn't feel like he could handle it. And we're glad that it sort of moved on.
And the judge who has it now is a very experienced judge who has handled other high profile cases and handled them very well. The case that comes to mind is she handled one of the cases connected to the Richmond Hill bombing case, which was the case in Indianapolis a while back, in which a person decided to commit insurance fraud by setting off an explosion in their home, and the explosion ended up taking out a big chunk of a neighborhood. Also
a felony murder case, which is also the case here. So interesting that she has experience with that and the media.
Yeah, she's a very experienced person.
So the defense attorneys, there are 2. These men were appointed by the court. As Mr. Allen indicated in his letter from jail, he and his family cannot afford private counsel. So this is somebody who the judge is basically going to and saying, I want you to take this on. Now, there's a Mr. Baldwin who's actually from out of town. He's from, south of Indianapolis, actually. Franklin. And so it's interesting that he's kind of coming in. We looked at his kind of my case profile, like some of the cases he's done, a lot of criminal work. I didn't see any murders, but I didn't really go back that far. But a lot of serious crimes. So somebody who's definitely comfortable in a trial setting, someone who's definitely comfortable with criminal law and very much, seemingly has an expertise in that. So he's going to be coming in from out of town, which seems sort of significant because there's such a, focus on this case up in that neck of the woods of Indiana. So this is somebody who's maybe not having some of those local pressures. And then there's a Mr. Rossi of Logansport, who's kind of more in the area, as a public defender up there. It seems significant and, reasonable that in such a high profile case, there's kind of 2 people who are coming together as public defenders who are going to be able to give him the best defense possible, because we've been disheartened to see some people kind of like criticizing the defense attorneys, and our system requires defense attorneys. You can't just throw somebody to the wolves after you can't try them in the public sentiment. You can't just say, oh, he looks guilty, so let's throw him away. He needs the best defense. Otherwise, on appeal, he could say that he had incompetent defense lawyers, and the process becomes even more of an ordeal for the families and the community. So people should not be harassing the defense attorneys either on this.
These are public defenders. It is important to note that not too many people would be able to afford to pay private attorneys in a case like this. Behind the scenes, we were hearing numbers that some attorneys were asking for retainers in the multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And that's just to start with.
A middle-class family would be bankrupted by this.
Almost not too many people could afford something like that. And as Alan wrote in his letter to the court, he obviously is not working since he's incarcerated. And his wife has been the target of so much harassment that she doesn't feel safe to work. So this is a family with no money coming in. And obviously not too many families would have that kind of savings in order to pay for a private attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think last time we spoke, we talked about the Stephen Avery case in Wisconsin. He had a big settlement that came to him. That's why he was able to afford a couple pretty good defense lawyers. But in this case, yeah, the common person definitely wouldn't be able to afford that. That's a lot of money. But you're right. Everybody has the right to a fair trial. So is there anything else in this case that's worth noting at this point? Any information really additionally from the things that we've talked about that are a point of interest, I guess you could say?
I would say that, this case has always been plagued by, in some cases, helped by speculation. It's gone on for years. People take the blurry photograph and they say, well, it looks like this guy or that guy. And sometimes they have a decent case for it. Sometimes it just seems like rank speculation. And at this point, there is a name now. There is a person. So, I think it's important to focus tips on who is this person? What can we know about him? Who was he hanging out with? What was he doing? Did he ever do anything bad in the past that maybe didn't get adjudicated? Like what? And so I think people should focus on what we have now. And I think it's kind of like the grand irony of this is that it's been 5 years. There's been so much online speculation. We've all been running around, us in the media, people in the communities, people outside the communities who care about this case. And I think it's just kind of strangely fitting that no one ever heard of Alan before. No, this man has not come. We have not talked to anybody, whether it's in the online sleuth community, the media community. Nobody had this guy in their notes even. And I think that just kind of shows you that sometimes the realities of an investigation are so different than what we can conjecture on the outside. And I think that's just an important thing to remember in any case, but especially this case going forward. And, we're going to be certainly trying to get answers, members of the media, members of, the citizen sleuths who kind of look into this. But it's just a good kind of reminder that, sometimes it's the thing you don't expect that's going to turn out to be the most important thing.
Yeah, and I'll reference one of the most intriguing things that I've researched, the Golden State Killer, right? Like that wasn't hundreds of individuals over 40 years brought forward the internet, investigative people. Then that guy wasn't on anybody's radar, but it all made sense when it played out. So we'll be curious to see what information comes out of this, and we might not know for a while. My last question for you, do you feel more understanding at this point? Not that you weren't in the first place, but do you feel more understanding, and should others that this is maybe why they held it so close to him and didn't give much information to the public?
No. And I'm going to tell you why. This is speculation, but I think when people say, well, the police must just been pulling a long con and doing like a 5-year investigation on this one person, I don't think that that's what happened here. I think he came up early and he came up again recently. And so I think a lot of the secrecy still, there should be some ultimately accountability and accounting for that. Now, that being said, keeping the probable cause sealed, I guess that will just depend on what's in it. Although it sounds at this point like law enforcement's sort of backing off the claim that it's really important to keep it sealed. So we'll see what happens with that. There's always reason to keep things secret in an investigation. And I think if you have cautious investigators, it makes them want to keep things secret because you can always undo that by going public. But once you go public, you can never undo that. It's already public. So I think we can understand the level of caution that they've treated this case with. But frankly, I think at some point, it has to be acknowledged that maybe some of the secrecy did kind of spur a lot of the online obsession and online sleuthing and frankly online harassment of people who are innocent parties, including the family members of the victims. So I think we would still kind of take some issue with the secrecy, but in certain select instances in this case, it's certainly justified. So we're not just saying, oh, shine a light on everything, because obviously that could be harmful to the case, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense, because when this all plays out, there's more than two victims. It's a lose-lose for everybody, like you said earlier, including his family. I do want to note that regardless of the outcome or anything, I think myself and a lot of other people really appreciate the work that you've done on the Murder Sheet podcast. I recommend everybody check it out. But seriously, the things that you've uncovered are significant for us to realize as a society, for us to realize as citizens, even if it has nothing to do with anything. The work that you've done is very significant, and I just wanted to make sure I personally told you guys that and in front of everybody.
Thank you very much.
That's really sweet. Thank you so much.
That means a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Absolutely. And hey, we'll catch you back up again. And as always, I appreciate talking to you. And everybody check out the Murder Sheet podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Indiana Stories. If you like what you heard, you can go to indianastories.com for more episodes and other stories related to Indiana. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast, there's several things you can follow: the podcast itself, the newsletter, and various other things. Thanks again for listening, and we will be back with another episode, and I hope you join us for another Indiana story. And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?